Hey, Gaming Geek coming at you with a story about my relationship with Games Workshop and how Games Workshop is like a crazy girlfriend, but you keep going back to because she's so hot. If you don't know anything about Games Workshop, they started back in the 70s and were one of the first companies to produce high-quality miniatures, and probably is the most famous miniature making company in the world. They're based in England, and over the past 40 years or so, they have consistently produced probably some of the best looking miniatures that's out on the market. Now, because of their early success and somewhat their monopoly on miniatures, they basically were infamous for not really paying attention to their customers, or they were infamous for consistently raising the prices for their products. To the point where a lot of people just couldn't afford to play their games anymore. They are known for Warhammer 40,000, which is a futuristic tabletop war game, as well as what used to be Warhammer Fantasy, which is a fantasy universe, but is now called Age of Sigmar. And so let me just describe to you now my history with Games Workshop. But before I do that, I need to explain to you hotness to craziness matrix. And if you don't know about that, click here and just check out the video that explains that. But in essence, the idea is that the hotter a person is, not just girls, but the hotter a person is, the more crazy they are. The hottest girl will also be the one who ends up wrecking your car, spending all of your money, killing your dog, and you end up in rehab. This person is terrible for you, but because she's so hot, you just keep going back and staying with her. And that pretty much is my relationship with Games Workshop. So back in '89, I was in college, and I don't remember, but I ended up buying a copy of the first edition Space Hulk boxed game. And I loved this game. This was the introduction or first date that I had with Games Workshop. And I loved all the plastic miniatures, the gene stealers in there. I painted up all of them. And it was really my first foray into painting. And I thought the rules were really tight, really fun, and the theme was so good. And then Games Workshop came out with a fantasy dungeon crawl called Hero Quest, and I bought that game. And again, the same thing, production value was through the roof with not only miniatures but also furniture that was in the dungeon that you could move around. I mean, it was the exact kind of game that I liked. Well, I ended up graduating, took a hiatus from any kind of gaming. Well, 20 years after my initial encounter and first date with Games Workshop, they had come out with a third edition of Space Hulk. I instantly snatched that up, and this was, I think, back in 2009. And it just brought back all of the memories and the fun that I had had in college playing this game. And this time around, the miniatures were even more amazing, even though they were plastic. They were so amazing that I spent 6 hours on each of the Space Marines. I just thought that they looked amazing. To this day, I think this is the best paint job that I have ever done on any set of miniatures. I was just having a lot of fun, and I was looking into buying expansions, was so invested and got involved with the online community. Board Game Geek had a page where I would go on regularly, and people were coming up with fan-made scenarios. There were player aids that were being made, and we were also able to post pictures of our paint jobs online, and I was becoming a part of this community. And on top of that, I started creating plaster cast 3D boards. Needless to say, I was totally dedicated to this game and to Games Workshop. But lo and behold, less than a year after I purchased the game, for some crazy reason, Games Workshop, like the crazy girlfriend who slashes your tires for no reason, ended up demanding that Board Game Geek remove all material from their website. Not only for Space Hulk, but for all of their games, including the ones that had been out of print for decades, and they had no intention of bringing them back. For a lot of us in the community, we were like, why would you demand that fan-made material be taken off? Because it's only promoting more customers for your games. It's only going to produce more investment and more money going towards your company. And so most of us were like, What is going on? Now, Games Workshop has been known, even before this, of being really militant about their intellectual property and sending cease and desist letters to people for doing really small things. It seemed like they were intentionally penalizing people for investing personally into the game. And I was so mad and upset, and a lot of us were, back in 2009 and 2010 when this was happening, that I swore that I would never buy another Games Workshop product again. I was so angry and so mad. And a lot of people actually did that too. They said, we will never contribute money again to this terrible company. I break up basically, but because she's one of the hottest girls that you ever dated, you might Facebook stalk her and see every once in a while what she's doing, seeing what other guy's life that she's ruining. And so I would hear every once in a while about new games that Games Workshop would produce. Really, I didn't pay that much attention. And by this time, there were other companies that were beginning to produce better game systems and rule sets that were infinitely superior to especially Warhammer 40K. And fantasy, because Games Workshop actually did not spend that much time or energy doing research about what the fan base wanted, and the rule set was becoming more and more bloated. But in the midst of this, there were other games that were coming out and competitors. Malifaux came out, War Machine by Privateer Press along with Hordes came out to be the primary competition with Games Workshop and became very successful, and their sculpts, actually, their miniatures looked amazing. So that became a real viable option, and the rule set was 100 times better. I actually bought Deadzone, which is from Mantic Games, another British company that specifically wanted to be the anti-Games Workshop company. They had affordable miniatures, they had a tight and really good rule set. I bought the starter box set of the first edition of Deadzone, and I'm getting back into the second edition now. So what happened was that the market dictated and began to rein in some of the craziness of Games Workshop. They were no longer the monopoly anymore, and they could no longer keep acting crazy. In fact, in 2014, they started losing revenue quite a bit, and that forced out their CEO during that time, and they brought in a new guy, which I didn't know until recently, and he started making changes that needed to be made a long time ago, where they started listening to the fan base and they started producing products that actually created an easier entry point for new gamers. After Thanksgiving of this past year, I was just browsing through a miniature market, and they had a new product from Games Workshop called Night Vault. Now, Night Vault is a game unlike any other game that Games Workshop has made before, because it's basically a card-driven miniature skirmish. I never got into Magic, which is a huge card game, because I need miniatures. And Night Vault sort of is that combination of a card management game as well as using miniatures on a tactical board. And that's sort of right up my alley in terms of what I think is fun. And it's a quick game with a solid rule set. One of the things that I really loved about it was you have a small faction of as few as 3 miniatures up to maybe a dozen or something like that. So very small, and you can buy multiple different factions. And I love that, because the original Warhammer games, you have to basically field hundreds of miniatures, spend hundreds of dollars to do that, and you're making a commitment to one army. After experiencing that, I began to wonder, maybe Games Workshop finally is losing some of its craziness and is actually going to produce not only awesome looking miniatures, but really fun and good games. I ended up picking up the next iteration of Warhammer Quest, which is Blackstone Fortress. And in the course of maybe 2.5 weeks, I painted all 44 miniatures and ended up playing the game, and it is fun. And then I found out that there were statistics that came out, or stat cards that came out for the Blackstone Fortress miniatures that would work for another game called Kill Team. And so I started looking into Kill Team. I ended up buying the rule book for that, along with a couple starter boxes. I think the decision to come out with a game like Kill Team, which is a small skirmish game, again, it's an introduction into the Warhammer 40K system, because this can easily go from this into the full-bore tabletop 40K rule set. What's been awesome is I've been able to paint up 4 different factions in the course of this past month. which I normally, if you told me that I was going to paint up 100 miniatures in a month, it was going to be just one army, I would never do it. I would just say, no, that's way too many. But because I was able to paint different armies, and there was a ton of variety, along with sort of the high quality terrain that came in these starter boxes, I went ahead and bought them. So in the course of a month, I find myself, after swearing to never get back together again with Games Workshop, I'm fully back in. Now, I'm a little bit nervous because I still see a little bit of evidence of craziness, the old craziness from before. What do I mean? If you take a look at my manual for Kill Team, you see that it's all cut up. And so the story behind that is because I'm getting older, my eyesight is not as well, the print on this book is pretty small. So I went ahead and purchased the e-version online from their digital store, only to find out that the e-reader that you have to use to read that manual, there's no zoom function. You cannot zoom in on it. And on my computer screen, the letters are smaller than what's in my printed manual. And so I wrote back to them asking for a refund, pretty much saying, hey, look, I thought that I would be able to zoom in on this. I can't do that. This is a waste of $35. Would you refund that to me? And you might have guessed it. They said no. Once you download it, we don't know what you're doing with that, so we can't refund that money. And that sort of triggered me. I think with any other company, I would have sort of understood that policy, right? But because it smacked a little bit of sort of the pain from the past of sort of screw you, I don't care about you, I just want your money, that kind of crazy aspect, I got triggered by that. Another thing that sort of makes me wary is that they are not going to reprint the starter set for Kill Team. You could get it for $130. It had 2 armies. It had terrain that by itself cost $100. And so it was an amazing deal. And in my mind, when I heard that they weren't reprinting that, I'm like, what are you guys doing? This was the perfect entryway for new gamers to get into your game. And as you can see, I invested and bought a ton of other stuff on top of that. And so why would you choose not to reprint this game? I mean, they can't keep it on the shelves. It's been flying off. Now you got to buy it on eBay for hundreds of dollars. And so why not go ahead and reprint this game? And so it's some of those sort of business decisions that reminds me of the craziness of the old Games Workshop. But I am choosing to be optimistic and hopeful that they're going to choose to make some of these business decisions that actually is going to be helpful for us, is actually going to be helpful for them, that's going to garner the respect and sort of turn around their infamy of screwing their own customer base and producing really high quality, good games with solid rule sets. So let's hope that that's going to happen. It'll be good for gamers, and I'll keep you updated with how that goes. Have you experienced the same thing as me, where you have sworn off Games Workshop only to find yourself tempted to get back in to some of their games? If so, go ahead and comment down below. And as always, like my video and subscribe. Helps me a lot.